From the newsroom of ImpactAlpha, I'm Monique Aiken, and this is your Impact Briefing for Friday, February 3rd, the beginning of Black History Month. Today I'm joined by ImpactAlpha's David Bank to share some takeaways from this week's Agents of Impact call on the steps some investors are taking to advance racial justice through the municipal bond market. Welcome back to the podcast, David.
Hey, Monique, it's great to be here, as always.
But first, here's what you need to know from the week in impact investing. Local fund managers may be more likely to have their fingers on the pulse of emerging markets. But, according to a survey from the Swiss impact investing specialist, Tomeo, institutional investors are more likely to allocate their capital to managers in the US and Europe. Tomeo identified a whopping 672 funds managing $84 billion in assets targeted at Africa, Latin America, and South Asia, but only a fraction of the funds were managed in those regions. Back in the U.S., ImpactAlpha secured $19 million to bridge capital gaps in that region. United Healthcare, the big insurer, kicked in $10 million. ImpactAlpha also raised a catalytic capital fund, which has already put out nearly $1 million in loan guarantees, technical assistance, and grants to 9 projects, including loans to flooded businesses and residents in Kentucky, and financing to renovate a local grocery store in a rural food desert. Al Gore's Just Climate made its first 3 climate tech investments. The unit of Generation Investment Management focuses on companies with potential to decarbonize tough sectors like steel and cement. Just Climate took stakes in a Swiss electric charging supplier and 2 Swedish companies, one making steel with green hydrogen and the other turning agricultural waste into biogas. The former vice president manages the fund with Generation partner David Blood. And Jonathan Rose is back in the market to raise capital for his company's 6th Housing Preservation Fund. The Jonathan Rose companies work to preserve affordable housing at risk of rent hikes when federal subsidies expire. They also bring in educational, workforce development, and health services to create what Rose calls communities of opportunity. This time, they're looking to raise $750 million. David, welcome back. I hear there was a great turnout for ImpactAlpha's Agents of Impact call this week on racial equity in municipal finance. And that kind of turned out to be pretty timely, given the events in Memphis, among other recent incidents of police brutality around the country.
Yes, we had Ryan Bowers of Activist, which got started back in 2015 around the police shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. So here we are again. Back then, they discovered there was like an inordinate percentage of the city's revenues were coming from fines and fees, mostly on their Black and brown residents. And they called that out not only as a racial equity issue, of course, but as a financial risk to the city's finances. And they developed a whole framework for evaluating those kind of risks. And so here we are again in Memphis. And Ryan pointed that Memphis has got a very high rate of pretrial detention, folks who can't make bail and who sit in jail for sometimes hundreds of days. And then they've got a prison services provider that gets paid based on the number of people in jail on any given day. So here's Ryan.
So all these things kind of go back together. There, you've got a private equity company that's taking public dollars that is, has a perverse incentive to keep people there, longer. There's a connection between the revenues also that are brought in by these traffic stops by police. You've got this strange flow of capital where your public dollars are subsidizing private interests that are undermining the economic security of the residents. And this is not just a Shelby County issue. Unfortunately, it's not a Ferguson issue. It's not even just a private equity issue. It's really one about what does justice and transparency look like in the municipal market, and how are public dollars, and Black and brown bodies being used to benefit everyone else except Black and brown folks.
So there is clearly a lot to unpack there, because just like some risks are underappreciated, other risks seem to be given undue weight.
Yeah, like mispriced risk all over the municipal bond market, it turns out. And some of them, as we were talking about, is these things that actually kind of undermine the city's fiscal health and are not appreciated by the ratings agencies and others. And then other risks that are kind of overweighted and kind of cause, in particular, like majority Black cities to pay more for their municipal bonds, possibly just simply because they're majority Black cities. People talk about a black tax, and it's pretty well documented. And in fact, Memphis is cited as an example of that. I think it's about two-thirds population is about two-thirds Black. And Diane Manuel at Addisina Social Capital, as you said, tried to pull apart some of the factors.
Is there discrimination? Probably. Is it some racism? More than likely. However, where does that happen? Could it be at the individual level? Maybe. Certainly with some regional stuff. Is there some corporate piece? Probably. But more than likely, there's some systemic issues that, because they are in place, ended up being racist and causing the cost of capital for communities like these, underserved communities, to have to pay more to come to market to fix their water pipes.
So what did some of the speakers share as possible solutions to this?
Well, folks keep coming back to engagement. One of the classic examples recently has been the Alabama prison bond of a couple of years ago. There was a hue and cry, as you'd imagine, particularly because one of the underwriters, Barclays, had previously pledged not to underwrite any private prisons. And here was a bond that was doing just that. So there was a quite a extensive campaign, and it caused that I think Barclays to withdraw from that deal, and then they had to find a different underwriter. I think they eventually did go through with the bond, as I understand it, but didn't raise as much as they had hoped. Now they're dipping into the general budget to still build the prison. So these things are very intractable, as you know, but it did point out that when folks sort of learn about how these kind of deals go down, they can get involved. Of course, the other place for engagement is before the issues go out, and working with the cities and trying to get the bonds organized around meeting the real needs of communities, whether that's for sewers and infrastructure, or schools, affordable housing, all the things that municipal bonds pay for. So the basic idea was, get much more engaged with the processes around the capital that's financing your cities. And sometimes it comes down to just asking the simple questions, which often, apparently don't really get asked. Who's going to benefit from the projects funded by the bond? How have the communities that are affected been involved? Where do the revenue flows come from to repay them? And that's kind of becoming a little bit of a toolkit for at least impact investors who are getting into muni bonds.
Yes, we need to change who, how, and what the money does at the end of the day. Who's involved with decisions, what it does in the community, who's disproportionately harmed, and who's disproportionately benefits from any given deal, and examine that in a race-aware way, which will help unfurl these complexities.
The problem, of course, is it's unfortunately much easier to find the problems than it is to find the solutions, and particularly the sort of investable solutions, which is what the title of the call was, is investable opportunities. We did break a little bit of news. Ryan Bowers and Activist are standing up something they're calling the Fixed Income Racial Equity Strategy. And they are looking beyond just municipal bonds for the reasons we just talked about, and bringing in things like loans to community development financial institutions that lend money to small businesses in low-income communities, and even corporate bonds for things that might be like broadband rollouts in low-income neighborhoods and those sorts of things. So trying to find a whole basket of fixed income products that can be wrapped together around this notion of what they call fiscal justice or racial equity. There have been some cities that have floated recently social bonds. New York, Atlanta, Chicago just did one the other day. Chicago's was sort of held up as an example of much more of a kind of engaged community sort of process around. I think they did abandoned lots and rehabilitating buildings and electric vehicle charging and affordable housing and a few other things. And sometimes some of these bonds have gotten better pricing because there actually is more demand from investors for these kinds of things. So social bonds in munis have become kind of a thing. Eric Glass kind of put a little bit of a reality check on it.
Enough. I don't really care what you call it. You can call it social, you can call it green, you can call it chartreuse, you can call it whatever the hell you want to call it. Doesn't matter to me. The idea here is I'm going to do I as an impact investor are going to do the due diligence around each and every bond issue to determine the environmental benefits of it, the social benefits of it, et cetera, who's the communities that this project is benefiting, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the municipal market has gotten really, really bogged down in labels. And what's even worse about the municipal market and labels is that most of it's self-labeled. It's not even third party. It's not even a third party label.
So my takeaway is that in spite of it all, we still have to be hopeful. And I think Marim Cabo said it best. Hope isn't an emotion, hope is not optimism. Hope is a discipline, and we have to practice it every single day as we fight to change the system.
I really agree, Monique. And I will say that was the spirit of the call. Folks came away, Dana Bazera, who used to be at Heron Foundation, now works at Greater Share. She said, that this kind of conversation, we had a few hundred folks on the call, was not even kind of on the agenda, a number of years ago for thinking about, municipal bonds had always been a kind of stodgy and maybe arcane sort of corner, and to think of it as really an avenue for this kind of positive impact now, and then obviously also sort of redressing the negative impacts, but particularly thinking of it as a way that, kind of real citizens can get involved in, in the real workings of their communities and bring forth, projects and solutions that really do work. Folks are getting energized around that.
Well, thanks, David. Let's let that be the last word. And that's going to do it for this week's Impact Briefing. Thanks to David and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for supporting ImpactAlpha's Muni Impact coverage, as well as our producer, Isaac Silk. Ready to try ImpactAlpha? Sign up for ImpactAlpha Open, free of charge, directly at ImpactAlpha.com. Want to go deeper? Grab a subscription and get full access to the site, Agents of Impact calls, and the daily email brief. Just go to ImpactAlpha.com/subscribe and choose an annual subscription. Thank you for listening. I'm Monique Aiken, Managing Director for TIP, the Investment Integration Project. Be sure to check back for next week's briefing, and until next time, take care.